Any anticipation that the halt in the bombing of North Vietnam would bring a corresponding decrease in the level of fighting in the South has been dispelled.
Our conservative ownership at the Detroit News hated Huntley Brinkley, NBC News, coverage of the Vietnam War. They would not allow producers to put any coverage from the Huntley Brinkley show on the 11 o'clock news. That just amplified what Channel 7 and Channel 2 were doing. They were looking at the real story of Vietnam and not what we were putting on.
WWJ TV News Special Report, Don Perry reporting.
Another night of tragedy in Detroit with 9 more deaths in the worst night of sniper fire since the lawlessness began last Sunday.
Jim Clark was the news director. He gets a call at 4 in the morning from the city editor of the Detroit News saying, get your crews out there, there's something really big happening on 12th Street. In comes the general manager who tells Clark all of this footage. You're not using any of it. Well, I've just spoken with Jerry Kavanaugh, the mayor of Detroit at the time, and he thinks if we don't air anything on the TV, this thing will just sort of die down on its own.
Well, my people were telling me what was happening and I couldn't put it on the air. That's a form of censorship, I suppose, but on the other hand, they were concerned about the welfare of the city, too.
None of us had ever covered in that city a civil disturbance before. So it was all new.
We were not to refer to it as a riot, that it was a disturbance. And even when the buildings were on fire and shots were being heard and everything, it was still a disturbance. It wasn't a riot.
There are tanks driving up and down Woodward. You say, well, let's go to the weather. I don't understand why they did that, but it cost them a great deal. In hindsight, it might have been the worst decision they could have made.
Even back then, a lot of black people were using the term rebellion. It was a rebellion against especially the Detroit police, but other forms of discrimination like lack of housing availability and jobs and things like that.
Channel 7 just had a better feel for the story, for what was happening on the street level. I remember Harrington on the streets.
What do you think about all that?
Oh, I think it's kind of awful.
Do you blame anybody for all this?
Really, I don't know who to blame. But
Think that makes it right?
No, it isn't right.
It's very hard when you lose the trust of your audience, that they can't depend on you to tell them what's really happening. And as important as that story was, the events that led up to it and even afterwards, it was a story that you couldn't ignore. And so they paid a dear price for that. They were trying to play catch up afterwards. And once the public feels like they can't trust you, you've got an uphill battle to win that trust back.
The industry was dominated by white males. And so when the riots came along, they didn't have any connection or knowledge of what was really going on in the communities or in neighborhoods or in cities. The industry was very non-diverse. And so you were getting very non-diverse decisions. And that was, at WWJ at that time, a really bad decision. They didn't have any black people working for them that they could talk to and get the reality. There were very few blacks in the industry, and there were less here. In a town like Detroit, you would expect more, but Detroit was no different than many towns across this country. There was no black representation in the media, not significantly, and certainly not in where decisions were being made.
Channel 7 knew from almost day one, from what they were putting on the air and what we were putting on the air, that we weren't telling the story. It was a pivotal point in the ratings in the city of Detroit. New viewers were picking Channel 7 over Channel 4.
As civil unrest rocked the city, Free Press columnist Betty Lou Peterson praised Channel 7's performance that she said far eclipsed that of WWJ, which had the pictures but otherwise handled it poorly.
I think it was during a golf tournament that was on ABC, and we interrupted it. This is Channel 7 News, Bill Barnes reporting. There's a major riot that appears to be out of control that started on 12th Street when the cops raided a blind pig. Somebody threw a bottle, somebody hit a cop hit back, and boom, it exploded. By the second day, we owned the ratings.
Bill was outspoken. He had some degree of hands on the community and the city and the pulse of the community. and he wasn't afraid to articulate it.
Despite the obvious underpinnings of discontent, Mayor Kavanaugh had misread the collective mindset of the black constituency that had elected him.
He was supposed to have been on the cover of next Monday's, tomorrow's Look magazine, as the mayor of the most successful American city when it came to race relations. And it was blowing up. Thousands of blacks rebelling against what they considered to be oppression.
The death toll remains at 37, with the last 2 victims, Negro men, found in the water-filled basement of a burned-out house.
You talked about Dick Westerkamp, and you know, that was the era, that's what was the style was back in early days TV. You were supposed to be this, you're stiff and you're very formal because it's television. And Bonds, that wasn't his personality. I'm looking at the camera and I know that thousands of people watching me. Doesn't matter, I'm talking just to you.
In 1965, WWJ had 50% more viewers than Channel 2 and 4 times that of Channel 7. But just 2.5 years later, right after the civil unrest, the lead had been slashed. Desperate to bounce back from his decimated news leadership, in late '67, news director Clark hired his first black reporter, radio newsman Jerry Blocker.
As the figures change in your population, you have to change your presentation. And I convinced the management that we should have a black member of the staff. Poor Jerry. The general manager of the station said, no, we're going to make him an anchor. He's African American and we need one to make him an anchor. Well, it was a shock to Blocker because he was not anchor material yet.
Channel 4 hired reporter Bob Bennett in '68, and Bev Payne in 1977 became the city's first black woman anchor.
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger. World Series bound and picking up steam.
Series bound late in the '68 season, the Tigers were on Channel 4 and national TV.
September 14th, a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon. Denny McClain attempting to become the first 30-game winner in more than 30 years.
McClain succeeded in a comeback Tiger win that day, of which there were dozens in the so-called Year of the Tiger. 3 days later, McClain watched from the bench.
The wind-up and the pitch. The line shot, base hit, right field, the Tigers win it. Here comes Kayline to score. The fans are steaming on the field, and the Tigers have won their first pennant since 1945. Let's listen to the bedlam here at Tiger Stadium.
Channel 4 then aired the Detroit-St. Louis World Series. Sonny Elliott mugged with fans at Tiger Stadium before Game 5. With Mickey Lolich on the mound, the Tigers trailed 3-1 and were down 3-2 in the 5th when Willie Horton's throw to Bill Freehand beat Speedy Lou Brock. The Tigers were still alive, winning 5-3. That evening, Bob Hope was at Channel 4 to record a segment for his new NBC special.
How about this, Tiger fans? I'm really not Denny McClain, but he'll be my guest along with Bob Gibson.
Hope, who acted in 54 Hollywood films, never won its biggest prize.
Well, how'd you feel when you won that all-important 30th game? Oh, it was quite a thrill, Bob. I imagine it's the same feeling you get when you win an Oscar. You know how that is.
Anything for a laugh. 3 days later, Lolich defeated Gibson in Game 7, his third complete game and third series win, the only pitcher in history to do so. Back home, the celebration was already underway.
A lot of people love to say the Tigers healed the wounds of the '67 riot rebellion, whatever you want to call it. No, they didn't. That's part of our comfortable, cozy mythology that we think it changed everything. That said, in the street celebrations, there was a lot of racial mixing in a very positive way, but it didn't cleanse anything. It didn't change anything.
The city was on a decline, and it continued on a decline after the '68 World Series. However, it was just an amazing thing that really united everybody, black and white, and it was just something so badly needed. So I think sports can lift the spirits of a whole city, and I think the '68 World Series really did that. It made people feel good, made people have some pride in Detroit after seeing the city devastated.
Detroit has always been known as a great and loyal sports town. It was also known as the bowling capital of the world. And in the 60s, Channel 4 aired Beat the Champ, catering specifically to a city of shift workers.
Beat the Champ,
which follows The Tonight Show and holds an amazingly large audience at 1 a.m.
I'm Don Kramer, WWJ-TV sportscaster and host of Beat the Champ, where local area winners compete against pro champions for big prizes.
Big prizes and big cash. Not bad. But it still wasn't the ratings king of Detroit bowling shows.
Get ready, Detroit. It's time to hit the jackpot on Bowling for Dollars. Here's your host, Bob Allison.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good evening, and welcome to Bowling for Dollars.
Channel 4 wanted to build a bigger audience as a lead-in to the 6 o'clock news, because they were not doing that well with the 6 o'clock news at that time.
And it's looking good. Is it Brooklyn again? Come on. Hey, beautiful.
Whatever pins they knocked down in two shots, they got $1 a pin.
What do you think about that?
If they threw a strike, they got dinner for two at one of several restaurants that advertised with the show.
That's looking good. That's looking good. All right, Karen. You have $10. You have dinner for two at the Rooster Tail on the river.
You know, what fascinated me was I thought the show was sort of projected toward, you know, the middle or lower middle class viewer. And I remember when we went off the air, high-powered executive people were coming up to me and they say, "Why'd they take that off?" And I said, "You mean to say you watched Bowling for Dollars?" And they said, "Wouldn't miss it. Watched it every night."
Okay, have a good weekend. I'm Bob Allison. We'll see you the next time we go Bowling for Dollars. Good night, everybody.
Allison was right about Channel 4 not doing well with the 6 o'clock news. And as the 70s rolled along, it would get worse.